guys, I don't know how many of you are familiar with ASMR. Like, what about this sound here? Now you might wonder, where do I come up with these creative ideas to do these kind of crazy ads? And actually, I just had my gamer subs, which is an NG formula that's keto friendly, doesn't have a nasty crash like a lot of the other ones out there, and I think it's actually pretty good value for money as well. You get like 100 servings in a small little case. It's a little 60 serving tub as well, but the original one I really enjoyed was watermelon ice. If you'd like to try some gamer subs, you can get 10% off your order with the code Thorin, Thorin, at gamersubs.gg. Last week, I published a video about NBK's situation playing for the team Double Pony, a mixed team he's playing for now that presumably hopes to become a team in due time, in the Flashpoint 3 regional major ranking tournament, a qualifier for the next major. And the problem was there was an obvious conflict of interest, which is that if his team had won their game, they actually did amazingly, and then OG had beaten Astralis, which seemed likely on paper at the time, spoiler, didn't happen, then in the next round of the playoffs, they would actually have met, and if they'd have played against each other, there's an obvious conflict of interest there because NBK is actually contracted to OG. He would have been playing in the same tournament, obviously playing potentially against his own team. Now, it was said at the time, don't worry, Double Pony will sub him out if he does face OG. Now, I pointed out, listen, it's still unfair. Like, why do they get an easier match, but then everyone else gets a hard match with NBK? But here's the thing. I've now got some updates to this story, which are going to address the same scenario, basically like what is going on from the Valve end, based on what I've heard. So, I heard that Valve is actually allowing NBK to play against OG if he happens to meet them in this tournament. Not Flashpoint, that it's Valve's decision to do. That's what I heard from a number of sources. And indeed, anyone who is in the same position, because obviously you can't make a rule just for NBK, it has to apply to everyone fairly, right? So basically, there are actually two other obvious cases within this exact same tournament of basically the same thing happening. Kjaerbye and Borup, who are playing for the mixed team Hyenas, who are hoping to get an organisation, are respectively, in the case of Kjaerbye, still contracted to FaZe Clan, and Borup to Heroic, their most recent teams. So this provides a ridiculous conflict of interest because these players, first of all, none of these players are actually in real organisations right now. They're not even loaned, as far as I can tell, contractually to these organisations. They're just playing in mixed teams while still contracted by teams that they'll now be able to play against potentially in a tournament that those teams compete in. And this is just fine to Valve. I mean, if people don't know, it's not even like this is totally inconceivable that these players could play for their main team again and maybe even become starters. In fact, NBK did stand in for OG after he'd been benched and they'd initially brought Nico in. Funnily enough, in those circumstances, I think it was an ESL Pro League match against Heroic, that was the point. Because the team felt, it feels like a conflict of interest to have Nico play against his old team that he's still contracted to, they actually subbed back in NBK. So they showed that NBK could still come back to the lineup potentially. And how fucking rich is that? Because they're obviously not going to do that for this tournament, right? But here's the other issue. And so obviously the issue there would be if Kjaerbye played against FaZe Clan and Borup played against Heroic. It's worse than you initially figured, those guys. The reason these teams don't want to do what OG did in EPL is because the difference is you get a points hit if you do this. You lose 20% of your points for putting a sub in during a match in the RMR. So as a result, it decreases your chances because really what the RMR does is give you points and then the aggregate amount of points qualifies you to the major. So basically it decreases your chances of qualifying for the major if you do what I think would be the honourable thing to do. And as a result, flip it the other way, it essentially incentivizes the Double Pony and Hyenas guys to not use the sub or someone else to play in this tournament. Instead, they are incentivized to use the player that could potentially cause the conflict of interest. So as a result, there could be 3 different matchups more, depending on what happens in the lower bracket, at a World Championship qualification tournament, which could have direct conflict of interest on a contractual basis between players playing against the team that currently owns their services effectively. Now, listen, so far, we haven't had one of those head-to-head matches yet. Vitality amazingly lost to the Double Pony team. And actually, then you thought, might happen now. Then Astralis bizarrely actually managed to just deck OG and beat them. So there hasn't been a direct head-to-head yet. By the way, isn't that bloody rich, right? Astralis preventing a direct conflict of interest in esports.
What has the world come to, boys? But obviously, they could meet in the lower bracket. By the way, I'd say the chances are actually higher of that happening now because the double pony team is a round ahead. And so OG, you would expect, would win the lower bracket match. And there's not a terrible chance they could meet later on. And they'd have to win a couple of best of threes because I'm assuming they flip the brackets. But yeah, we'll have to look into that, right? Then there's another issue because remember, this isn't just about those players. Obviously, teams, players, even some of the TOs have pushed for the idea for majors that we need to have subs or can we have a sixth man? Obviously, Vitality wanted it themselves, right? So they could have Nevera play. Now, I'm hearing that the same Hyenas team I referred to earlier that Borup plays for and Kjaerbye have Jdubs listed as one of the 6 players so they could skip the qualifying part, just come straight into the RMR based on the previous competition when some of these players were previously playing for North. And HLTV also reported this. I'll put it in the description box below. So here's what they said. Oh, well, here's what was reported, basically. It said Jdubs' presence on the roster would be formal. Most likely, Fredrik Fessor Sorensen will play in the Hyenas lineup as it was originally intended and announced at the tournament. Which, by the way, basically, as far as I can tell, is what's happening, right? So they've got Kjaerbye listed so they can have the 3 out of 5, and then they're just going to sub him right out for this rookie Fessor, who they actually want to play with anyway, and as a result, because they think the time will be better, just eat the point slots and have a better chance in the game of qualifying for the major. Now, I understand why they did it, because they want to have a better chance to win and go to the major, which could be a big deal for getting an organisation which they want. But the problem I have is on the Valve end, because when you made that rule, that was for, like, sick people to sub in, just do moves based on, like, you know, what you think of the lineup. It wasn't done so that you could just get a little loophole to get around the 3 out of 5 rule. That is not the spirit of this rule. Never mind what the letter of the law says. And so, in my opinion, for RMRs and minors in the future, a lot of teams out there should just cynically keep one of the players they might otherwise kick if they're of the 3 out of 5 from a good spot in the major or a past RMR tournament, and then just sub one out for your real player, and hence somehow you get the spot of having 3 out of 5, but actually you're only basically doing 2 out of 5, and maybe you just have to play one game or something, or maybe you don't have to play at all, maybe he's just your sub in that scenario. So I said it in the past video, I still think it now. Valve doesn't care. They worship players. Everything's just for the players. They ignore the points that we make. People like me, people in the community, because yeah, they come up with those tweets, oh, we do listen to everything, you know. Well, then logically, they didn't care about my other points, or they didn't care about community concern about conflict of interest, or what this does, or how the rules are being abused, or, you know, what is in the spirit of the game and fair competition. We already know that, because last year, in some of the RMR, they ignored when MIBR played against where the coach of MIBR, Dead, who actually cheated in this game, and one of the players from MIBR, Taco, actually had ownership stakes in the gaming team they played against in a World Championship qualifier. Now, they didn't care about that until after it had already taken place as a match. Bonus points, yeah, the coach even cheated in that one, so yeah, great job, Valve, yeah, you opened the fucking can of worms on that, didn't you, mate? Now, the fan is going to go, who cares? I do, imbecile. I care about teams potentially pressuring or paying a player to throw a game. I care about teams rigging matches or the bracket using contracts. I care about a team skipping a qualifier when they don't in good faith plan to play with the player that the system ensures they have to actually skip that qualifier that maybe they wouldn't have made it through. I care about a system which incentivizes teams to be ungentlemanly and potentially make unfair matchups that can never truly be have pure competitive integrity. CSPPA, as usual, they just enforce standards that benefit players as far as I can tell. They just sleeped on this issue, nothing to say. Rest of the community sleeping. A lot of other people don't seem that bothered by it. It's just small news stories. Because again, you guys just want to see players play particular matches, right? Who gives a fuck if it's actual competitive integrity going on around the matches, right? This video was kindly supported by Eddie, Kris with a K, Lager15, Pronogo, Shenlong, Zachary Carter, Adam Ochs, Alexander Rao, Andreas Kroknes, Animosity, Dean Tanglis, ErikHillestad, Hades, Jdubs, Jensen Goh, Joseph Ginsburg, Kovacevicd, Tobias Bernasconi, Zoomba, Zyrathenia, and as always, special thanks going out to my boy Jerky's Minion. Want to suggest topics or guests for my shows? Want to ask me questions in my monthly AMA? Do you want teasers? Who are the upcoming guests? Maybe you want to be part of one of those discussions I do where we nerd out. Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrolluminati today by using the Patreon link in the description box below.